Okay, joining the conversation now, we have senior national political correspondent for the Washington Post, Ashley Parker. Ashley, your latest reporting, you traveled to a town in western Wisconsin last month to discuss this fall's election with so-called double haters, voters who dislike both of this election's candidates. And you conducted more than 60 interviews and found, quote, sentiments ranging from resignation and dismay to disbelief and anger over an election in which both the Democratic and Republican parties have served up the same two deeply unpopular candidates. What more can you tell us?
So I went to Hudson, Wisconsin. You're right. Very far western Wisconsin, basically a river town on the river that divides Wisconsin from Minnesota. And I chose Hudson because in 2020, which was an election where we knew that something was at stake at that point, right? The margin between Trump and Biden, who won there, was small. It was just 155 votes. It was smaller than the margin of people who took the time to show up to the polls and vote for someone else, sort of, in essence, a protest vote. And it's emblematic of the state, too, where that same thing happened, where Biden won, but had the people who showed up and voted for someone other than Trump or Biden chosen one of them, the election could have swung. So these are the voters who are going to, in many ways, decide the election. And it was fascinating to talk to them. A couple of things I learned. One was age was a concern for both men. That came up constantly, although the concerns were more acute for Biden. They'd sort of talk about both men as too old, but they really had concerns, fairly or unfairly, of Biden's ability to do the job, even those who plan to vote for him. And then it really broke down. It was fascinating. The people who didn't like Biden or had concerns, they were really beyond the age. It was policy. And they mainly mentioned to me the economy, how they personally feel that it hasn't gotten better, and the Israel-Gaza war. And for Trump, it really, and this may not surprise you, it really wasn't about policy at all. It was about personality. They actually, some of them thought he'd done a fine job as president, but they didn't like how boorish or crass he was, or the tweets, or sort of who he was as a person. So really different reasons they don't like these two guys, but at the end of the day, they don't like these two guys, and they're sort of desperately trying to figure out what they're going to do in November.
Ashley, from your just giving us that snapshot of what you got on both candidates, would you think it wise that the Biden people give more emphasis on how the economy was under Donald Trump? Because we do have 4 years to look at. He was president, and he did serve. I know unemployment went way up under his mismanagement of the COVID-19 crisis, and they're not emphasizing that enough. And do you think, in terms of Trump, if he becomes more reserved and measured in his public appearance, would that help his campaign, since that seems to be his personality and his kind of over-the-top type of behavior seems to be what you're saying voters are concerned about?
So I'll answer your second question first, because that's the easier one. And the answer is yes, absolutely. If Donald Trump became un-Trump-like, that would absolutely help him with these voters. The question is, that's sort of core to who he is. And we've seen he can sort of control himself, become, as you said, more reserved. For a day, for a couple days, for a week, he hasn't really been able to maintain that for, say, an election cycle or until November. But if they could wave a magic wand, his team would love that, and that would absolutely help him. The Biden calculation is a little trickier because the economy is incredibly difficult for them to message on, as you point out, right? There's a ton of indicators right now that the economy, by a lot of metrics, is doing quite well, but it has not trickled down to the way voters feel on interest rates, on grocery prices, even on gas.
All right, the Washington Post's Ashley Parker, thank you very much for your reporting this morning.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.